Hello everyone, this is lecture 7 of EEE 153, MIPS Single Cycle Data Path. In this lecture, we'll have a short review on the important logic blocks that we will encounter and use in the MIPS data path. We'll also review the MIPS instruction encoding, and from there, build the data path and identify the necessary control signals. We'll also cover only a subset of the MIPS core instruction as listed. Our objectives for this lecture are the following: to understand how the instruction encoding affects the data path construction, to understand how each major block in the data path works from a top-level perspective, to identify the control signals needed by each data path block, and finally to construct a single-cycle data path and tabulate the necessary control signal values for a subset of the core MIPS instruction set. We will start by defining what is a computer. As general as it can get, a computer is a machine that can compute. Specifically, a computer is an electronic machine that can accept digital inputs, follow and perform instructions to process data, and produce the intended output. A computer has 5 components: the input, output, memory, data path, and control. The input may come from our devices like mouse, keypad, or some other peripheral for the case of microcontrollers. The output may be through the monitor display, speaker, or some other output device. Another fundamental component of a computer is the memory. The memory contains both data and instruction and also acts as the interface between the input and outputs to the computer. The data path includes the logic blocks that perform the processing of data, while the control is the one that manages the flow of information. These last two components are normally integrated on a single chip and as a whole is called the processor, or traditionally the CPU. By now, you should already know how to write MIPS assembly programs and how the instructions are encoded in machine language that are understood and performed by the processor. But now we'll try to answer how does the processor interpret and execute these instructions. Specifically, how does the processor do this at a hardware level? From a switching theory and digital logic design class, we were introduced with the fundamental building blocks, the logic gates like the AND, OR, NOT, XOR, multiplexer, etc., which are considered combinational blocks, meaning their outputs depend on the input combination they receive. We were also introduced with the flip-flop, which is a sequential block whose output depends on the sequence of input it received and not merely the input combination. But how does the data or instruction memory work? Do they operate just like the flip-flop? Or are there other blocks we need to complete the processor? Hopefully, we can answer these questions in this lecture. However, before diving in deeper, it would help if we have a quick review of digital design. Let's skip the basic AND, OR, NOR, XOR gates and start right ahead with the multiplexer, which is used extensively in data paths. A multiplexer, or MUX, whose symbol is shown, acts as a selector from multiple inputs. In essence, the MUX copies one of the inputs into the output based on a select signal, and thus, a multiplexer should have multiple inputs but only one output. A MUX needs m-bit select signals to support a maximum of 2 to the m inputs. In the example shown, m is equal to 2 and can therefore support 2 raised to 2 or 4 input signals. If another input needs to be considered, say we have 5 inputs, then the width of the selector or control signal must at least be 3. If we want to support input and outputs that are more than 1 bit wide, for example, 3 bits wide as shown, then we need to connect 3 1-bit multiplexers in parallel with the select signals shorted. Note that the number of bits of the select signal simply depend on the number of options and not on the width of the inputs. Another logic element we will review is the flip-flop. Flip-flops are used to store or hold information. There are different types of flip-flops: the SR, JK, T, and D flip-flops. However, the most commonly used one is the D flip-flop. As such, when we simply say flip-flop, we can assume that it is a D flip-flop. Flip-flops have an input signal to trigger writes. In a processor, this signal is normally connected to a periodic clock signal, and in our discussion, we will assume positive edge triggered flip-flops, and as such, flip-flops are written to once every clock cycle during the rising edge of the clock. Writes to flip-flops follow a sequence and thus are called sequential writes. First, the D input must be provided to the flip-flop. Next, the rising edge of the clock must occur before the D value is stored into Q or the state of the flip-flop. For example, say we feed this input sequence to the flip-flop with an unknown initial value or state. We must first note that the input values when the clock rising edges occur before we can determine the output Q. At the first rising edge of the clock, the D input value is 1 and therefore the register will assume a value of 1. At this point, the D input value changed, but since the flip-flop does not care when the D value changes and writes are only triggered by rising edges of the clock, then the flip-flop will still retain its value 1. On the second clock rising edge, the value of D is 0 and therefore the flip-flop will store a value of 0. On the next rising edge of the clock, the input D is still 0, so the flip-flop will still store a value of 0. Now, while we say that flip-flops operate with a sequential write, its contents, on the other hand, are read in a combinational manner. Like AND, or NOT gates, the output of a flip-flop is always available and readable regardless of the clock signal level. Additionally, a flip-flop can also have a set, reset, and enable input. Set and reset signals are combinational input signals that force the contents of the flip-flop regardless of the clock. A write-enable signal, on the other hand, can prevent or allow the writing into the flip-flop on the rising edge. Registers are simply D flip-flops connected in parallel with one flip-flop storing 1 bit each. Thus, a 32-bit register is composed of 32 flip-flops in parallel. To illustrate how a register works, consider an 8-bit register that can store 2 hex characters as shown. In the first rising edge, the input was not yet ready, so we are not yet sure what is saved into the register. On the second rising edge, a value of CD is written, while on the third rising edge, a value of 23 is written. In the next example shown, a write-enable signal controls when the register can be written to. In the first rising edge of the clock, the write-enable signal is still deasserted or 0, and therefore the register retains its unknown value. On the second rising edge of the clock, the write-enable is now asserted or set to 1, and therefore the register will store whatever it is inputted on its D input side or data in, and therefore the register will be written with the value of CD. On the third rising edge of the clock, the write-enable is deasserted, so the register will not be written to and retain the value of CD. Here, we list the 32 32-bit registers of the MIPS register file. You are most likely are or will be programming using the register names, for example, $B0, $A0, etc. However, there is a corresponding register number for each, and these numbers are used by the assembler to encode the instructions into machine language. These numbers are also the ones being used at the hardware level to distinguish the registers. Just a quick recap, memory addresses in MIPS are 32 bits long. MIPS is a byte addressable architecture, meaning each address corresponds or points to some 8-bit data in memory. MIPS can be little or big endian, and one needs to check if the MIPS you are working on is little or big endian. Instructions are 32 bits long, and again, there are 32 32-bit registers. Say we have this assembly program. This program will be stored in this manner. Since instructions are 32 bits or 8 hex characters or 4 bytes. the instructions will occupy 4-byte addresses that are word aligned. These addresses are multiples of 4 and end in 00 when written in binary. However, in hex, the last characters must either be 0, 4, 8, or C. The instruction encoding determines how each instruction is formatted in binary or machine language. For example, the encoding determines why the first add $V0, $A0, $A1 was converted to 0x851020. Although the instructions are automatically converted by the assembler for us, we will still study the instruction encoding to gain insight on the limitations of the instruction set and how it influences the hardware design. This table shows the instruction encoding for the three MIPS instruction formats, the R-type, I-type, and J-type. The upper 6 bits are always the opcode. RS, RT, and RD are 5 bits to identify which among the 32 registers. RS is always a source, RD is always a destination, while RT can be a source or destination depending on the instruction. Other fields are the shift amount and the function to specify the number of shifts and the operation for R-type instructions. The immediate is 16 bits for I-type instructions such as add I, load word, store word, BEQ, BNE, etc., while the immediate is 26 bits for J-type instructions, which include jump and JAL. In this lecture, we will only cover and consider the instructions shown in this table. The R-type instructions add, sub, and OR have the same opcode but differ in the function field, while the rest can be identified by the opcode alone. For load word and store word, RS acts and provides the base address to be added with the offset contained in the 16-bit immediate. Other details in the encoding will be discussed along the way as needed. Let us show some examples first. Consider the add instruction shown. If we check the table of register numbers, T3 is register 11, S3 is register 16, while S4 is register 17. Among these three, the first one is the destination register, while the other two are the source registers. To construct the instruction code, we use the table above. Opcode is 0, RS is 16, RT is 17, RD is 11, shift amount is 0 for add, while the function field is 32 for add. For the second instruction, add I, we identify first the register numbers. So we have V0, which is register 2, and A0, which is register 4. The first one is the destination register, while the second one is the source register, which will be added to the immediate. From the table above, the opcode for add I is 8, RS is 4, RT is 2, and the immediate 15 is encoded in 16 bits. For the last example, we have a load word instruction. Again, we identify first the register numbers. T0 is register 8, while T8 is register 24. The base register, or RS, is register 24, while the destination register is register 8 RT for the load word. Constructing the instruction code, we have the opcode for load word, which is 35 in decimal. The base register is 24. The destination register is 8. And the -4 immediate is encoded in 16-bit 2's complement. If it is unclear how this corresponds to -4, then I suggest that you review how to convert 2's complements. To guide us in identifying the necessary hardware and connections for our MIPS data path, we list first the smaller steps or tasks that need to be done in executing an instruction. Although we'll only consider a few instructions in this lecture, we'll see later on that other MIPS instructions will follow the same sequence. First, we need to get the instruction. We are already familiar with the stored program concept where the instructions are stored in memory. To retrieve the instruction, we need to access the memory by providing the instruction's address, which is stored in some register called the PC or program counter. Next, we need to identify the fetched instruction. Is it an add I, BEQ, load word, and so on? Identifying the instruction is done by the control unit and is necessary to identify the operands and the operation. The next step is to fetch the operands from the register file and possibly extract the immediate from the instruction code. We then process the operands as specified by the instruction using the arithmetic and logic unit or ALU. Lastly, we store the results in location identified on the second step. Aside from the register file, the result can also be saved in the data memory for store words or the PC for branches. Alternatively, we can read from the data memory and store into the register file as with loads. In this part, we clarify how we want the major blocks of the data path to work, starting with the instruction memory or inst.mem. First, we will assume in our discussion that the instructions have already been preloaded. We will consider the inst.mem as a read-only memory or ROM in our discussion. If you look at the symbol provided, there are no ports for writing. The ROM assumption is true in the operation of most microcontrollers, where the program can only be loaded by a special programmer device or sequence. In a general-use computer, the OS is among the ones responsible in loading the instructions into the memory directly accessible by the processor. The inst.mem is also accessed through combinational reads. That is, after providing the address, the corresponding instruction will be fetched and appear at the output after some delay, but without waiting for a clock. This is just like how a network of AND or NOT gates will work from input to output. The next major block in the data path is the register file or reg file, which contains the 32 general-purpose registers. Since the MIPS ISA supports only up to 2 register operands, then the register must have 2 ports to enable reading 2 registers at a time. MIPS instructions also write only to 1 register, so having only one set of inputs for writing is enough. The register file also works in the same way we have discussed for registers: combinational read and sequential writes, where writes only happen on the rising edge on the clock. Note also that the reg file has a write-enable input labeled as write_rf, which must be asserted to enable writes. The write data port is also highlighted with a different color to indicate that the signal cannot pass through that port without a clock rising edge. We will use this symbol for the arithmetic and logic unit or ALU. The ALU accepts only two 32-bit operands, and the output is also a 32-bit data. The operation to be done with OP and OPB is determined by some control signal called ALU-op. The number of bits and code to operation correspondence for ALU-op varies per design. Aside from the 32-bit result, the ALU also has a zero flag output, which is asserted whenever the result is exactly 0. This flag will prove to be useful in supporting conditional branches later on. The ALU can also be connected to the shift amount field, although the connection is not anymore explicitly shown. A possible implementation or possible general structure of the ALU is shown. There are different logic blocks, all operating on operands A and B, and generating all possible outputs for each of these different blocks. However, only the desired output is multiplexed using ALU-op. Again, how this ALU-op maps to different operations can vary from one design to another. One can use the same code as func for R-type instructions for simplicity. However, one can also use some other set of codes. In either case, the control unit must be able to generate the correct ALU-op per instruction. For example, the control unit must generate the ALU-op for addition even if the instruction is a load word which do not have a func field. Note that load words need to add the base address to the offset to generate the effective address. In the same way, the control unit must also generate the ALU-op for addition if the instruction is an add-I, even if add-I does not have a func field. We'll now start constructing our data path. We'll consider first the simplest R-type instructions, add, sub, and OR, which all have similar formats. To show how the signals propagate, we will use a specific example. An add register 2, register 4, register 5 instruction stored at address 0. The data path starts with the program counter or PC register that contains the instruction address, which is 0. This is fed to the instruction memory, and the corresponding instruction code is then outputted by instmem. From the instruction code, RS, RT, and RD signals, being 4, 5, and 2 respectively, can be extracted by simply connecting the appropriate bits to the reg file inputs. After some delay, the reg file should be able to output the contents of registers 4 and 5. Note that we'll use square brackets to denote contents of. While the register operands are being fetched, the instruction code actually goes to a control unit which generates the proper ALU-op that corresponds to an add instruction. After all the inputs have been provided to the ALU, the sum will be generated after some combinational delay. The control unit also generates the control signal for write RF to enable the write that occurs at the following clock rising edge. During the clock rising edge, register 2 will be written with the sum and the instruction is finished. However, is it really finished? How will the next instruction be executed? Thus, we note that we still need to add a mechanism for the program to proceed. This is achieved by incrementing PC by 4. Thus, we'll need another 32-bit adder to perform that job. With the new adder in place, after some delay, the PC register will see a value of 4 at its input, which will allow the next instruction at address 4 to be executed in the next clock cycle. Note that this adder works in parallel with the rest of the instruction execution, as the path from PC splits into the adder and into the instmem. Most likely, the value of 4 will be ready at the PC input at an earlier time than the value of the sum at the write data port of the register file because of the shorter logical path for the PC increment than for the actual operation. However, even so, with PC and RD both being registers, both will be written to at the same time because they will still need to wait for the clock rising edge to occur. Note also that the clock connections are not drawn explicitly to simplify the drawing. The data path and control unit were identified to be the two components of the processor. As such, the details of the control are normally hidden when drawing data paths. However, we should always remember that it is the control unit that generates the control signals from the 32-bit instruction code. Specifically, the control unit evaluates the opcode, sometimes including the funct, to determine the instruction to be done, and thus to be able to generate the proper control signals for the data path after identifying the instruction. In the data path we discussed so far, the control signals are write RF and the ALU op signals, although more control signals will be needed as we support more instructions. The data path shown here has been expanded to support add-I instructions. We note first the new blocks added. First, the sign extend block, which sign extends the 16-bit 2's complement immediate from the instruction code to 32 bits since the ALU accepts only 32-bit inputs. The sign extended immediate must also make its way to the ALU, so we add a multiplexer to enable it to take inputs from both read data 2 for R-type instructions and the immediate when the instruction is an add-I. A new control signal, cell op B, must therefore be generated to choose which among these two signals must be fed to the ALU as operand B. A second multiplexer was also added for the write reg input of the register file, since now the destination can be RD for R-type instructions or RT for add-I instructions, and a new control signal, celldest, which we will call celldest, is also needed for this multiplexer. Let's inspect how the signals will propagate in the data path for a specific add-I instruction. We assume that the PC starts with the value of 0x10 or 16 in decimal, which is then fed to the instruction memory and will allow the add-I instruction encoded as 200A000F to be fetched after some delay. Note that the positions for RS, RT, and RD are fixed. Thus, even as the instruction code has not yet been processed by the hidden control unit, RS and RT values of 0 and 10 can already be fed to the register file. Bits 11 to 15 will still be extracted as RD, although its value will not be critical for the add-I instructions, as bits 11 to 15 are actually part of the 16-bit immediate encoded within the instruction. In this example, the immediate 15, or F in hexadecimal, will be sign extended to 32 bits and appear at the output of the multiplexer for operand B. After some delay, the contents of RS and RT will be fetched, and appear as read data 1 and read data 2. Note that even if the role of RT for add-I is the destination register, since the data path is hardwired to accept RT as the second read register number, then the contents of R10 will still be fetched, although its value will be considered as don't care for add-I instructions, as cell of B is considered cell of B will be set to select the sign extended immediate. So here we give it a value of 1 to select the immediate 32 signal. Note that this value, however, depends on how the multiplexer is connected. If the immediate is connected to the 0 or the first multiplexer input, then cell of B must be 0. Next, the sum of R0 and the immediate will be generated by the ALU and fed to the register file after some delay. The control unit also needs to generate the proper ALU op for addition for this to happen. Now, while all of this is happening, the adder on the left generates the incremented PC plus 4 value. When the next clock rising edge occurs, PC will get a value of 0x14, while R10 will get a value equal to the sum of R0 and the immediate value 15.